It's December, and I'm getting the kitchen fired up, figuratively speaking, not to make Christmas candies, but to feed the bees. The weather has warmed up enough and should be warm for several days to make it safe to give them some sugar nectar. We do feed sugar nectar throughout the winter because it helps them to be stronger and ready to go in the spring, and I think it just helps them to survive. They don't lose as many of their sisters through the cold weather. So, to make winter nectar, you want a 2-to-1 ratio of sugar to water. And that's very easy to do because to each 1 quart of water, you want to add 4 pounds of sugar. And that lately at the H-E-B, the 4-pound bags of sugar have been more available and also less expensive per ounce than buying a 5-pound or a 10-pound or a 20-pound bag. Also, when you're in your 70s, it is easier on your back and your joints to use these smaller containers of sugar. They're not so heavy to tote around from the store to the house and then into the sugar pot. So I use a big old kettle like this, even if I'm doing just a small batch. This batch will end up being on about, it'll get up to about here when it's all prepared. We start with just the water, and I've got 4 quarts of water in here, 4 pounds of sugar to each quart of water, and I've got the burners. Both burners are on, and I guess they're not called burners. I guess they're called, I don't know, elements. Anyway, they're both on, and we've got it on high. As soon as it begins to boil, you want to take it off the heat and begin to add your sugar and stir it around. Don't let the water boil with sugar in it, because that causes some reactions between the water and the sugar that makes it not so healthy for the bee. All right, it's just starting to simmer. It's been 13 minutes since I turned the burners on and put it on here. I like using these big enamel kettles because they'll accommodate just virtually any amount of nectar that I need to make for my small colonies, and the water tends to boil more quickly. Now down in the bottom you will see calcium deposits from when this thing was used as a canner, which I have used it for in the past, and those sometimes flake off a little bit, but a little bit of calcium in the nectar is not going to bother the bees one bit. Now that it's come to a low simmer, it's ready for me to put the sugar in. It doesn't have to be absolutely at a rolling boil, and you keep your measures better if it's only simmering, because we haven't lost as much water through steam. Now, when I do add the sugar, I'll put the lid on the kettle to keep the steam in, to keep the sugar to water ratio as close to ideal as possible. I put the kettle in the sink because it's easier for me to reach when I'm pouring the sugar in, more at my waist height than if I had it up on the countertop. And if I splash, it just goes into the sink and doesn't get on my countertop. Now this is going to be highly saturated when I've added all 4 of my bags of sugar. So I stir after each addition. Every time I use this spoon, Jerry and I did several jobs in Caracas many years ago, and we bought this wooden spoon from a street vendor. God bless the people of Venezuela. So sad. Such a beautiful country and such beautiful people. Enough reminiscing. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to add the 3 other bags of sugar. Stir well. At this temperature, the sugar dissolves almost instantly, as you can see. Bubble, bubble, toil and trouble, fire, burn, and cauldron bubble. All right, I get carried away sometimes. As you can see, the last few bits of sugar are dissolving a bit more slowly than those first ones did. This is going to be a very saturated sugar mix. So, alright, you can see how this mixture has become murkier, a bit darker. I'm going to let it cool down, and as it cools down, it'll clear up. A few hours later, the nectar is clear and room temperature. I have my lineup here of juice jugs ready to receive their sugar nectar, and we'll fill those and then put them in the refrigerator and keep them until we're ready to use them to feed the bees. About a quart at a time. The juice bottle is supported on the sink, and the pot that I'm using and I don't fill it all the way full because when I do feed the bees, a little bit of air at the top of the bottle helps keep me from spilling it. And on these gallon containers, I really don't fill them all the way because they get to be too heavy if I do. I like using the double sink because I can put the filled jars there to sit and wait for all their sisters to be filled, and then I cap them all and rinse them off at the same time. Apple cider vinegar is good for keeping mold out of your top feeders, and Honeybee Healthy provides some essential oils, but I found that adding either of these to the sugar nectar increases robbing behavior. The other bees can smell these additives, and it is not a good thing when they start coming into your hives and stealing the nectar that you've provided for your own bees. Now that we've got our sugar nectar all prepared, the next step is to go out into the apiary and feed the bees. The next video in this series will be about that. Meanwhile, happy beekeeping, y'all.